Hello. Today I'd like to talk to you about the writing process in the natural sciences, and I'm going to draw on my own experience as a writer and tell you a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that I have found as a writer in the natural sciences. As you recall, there are these 5 main branches of the natural sciences, but I am an interdisciplinary scientist. So again, I'm always thinking about my audience, and sometimes I write for very particular audiences, like a group of restoration ecologists, and in that case I have a pretty good understanding of what they already know and how my work contributes to the larger body of work of restoration. But when I'm writing for a more interdisciplinary group, whether it be a group of conservation biologists, whether it be a group of environmental scientists or of students, or for the public, then I really need to think about not just the language that I'm using, but how I frame my questions and how I sort of enter the conversation that has already been going on in my field. So there are several types of writing that I do and that a lot of natural sciences do. And in the academic writing video, I talked a lot about the sort of more academic writing of the research reports and the grant proposals. But again, I just wanted to note that a lot of us spend a fair amount of our time and energy thinking about research translation. And this is where some of my most exciting work has come in. The writing process in the natural sciences mimics the research process. We spend a lot of our time in this sort of pre-writing thinking phase, drafting phase, from the very beginning of our research. So the scientific method requires us to start with the hypotheses and test that hypotheses. But before we're even ready to start asking questions, we need to learn about what has come before us, what is possible for us to ask, and how we might end up going about answering that question. So you can think of the pre-writing process, the pre-thinking process in the natural sciences as really taking up the bulk of the time of the whole process. And it's one that can be iterative too. You might start with one hypothesis, find out somebody else has already tested it. You might start with a hypothesis and test it yourself and find out that you don't have the methods worked out in order to fully test that hypothesis. So there's a lot of reiteration that goes on in that process. But when it actually comes down to the writing, the methods and the results sections are usually the easiest to write. The methods are, the recipe, the directions for how you did your study, and the results are the reporting of the results. What did you find? The facts of your experiments. The revising part of the process, as I mentioned before, is happening even before you ask your question. But when you finally have the full draft of your work, you yourself will go through lots of revisions, asking colleagues for their input. And you want to be very careful that you're presenting your results clearly and that you're interpreting them well. Because in reality, what most people do is read your abstract, skim through your methods and results, maybe look at a few tables and figures, and then get to that last paragraph of the paper where you're putting your results into a larger context. The peer review process, once you're finally finished with your draft, is one that can take years. You submit your paper to an academic journal, to some other outlets, if you're submitting a grant proposal to a funding agency, and that paper goes out for review by your colleagues, and often you will get a whole lot of comments to take into consideration. And those comments are not editing by nature. They're mostly challenging you on your actual hypotheses, on your methods, on your data analysis and your results, and can even give you some ideas for other sorts of literature that you should be citing in the context of your paper. So the peer review process sometimes will require you to go back to square one. Hopefully not, but in some cases that is what happens. Here's an example of a paper that I published that is a short communication. It's a note to my colleagues, to fellow restoration ecologists, about an interesting result I found as a result of a study I did. It is 750 words beyond the abstract, so it is again very short, but it didn't start out that way. It started out as a full paper in that IMRAD format, Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. But after a few rounds of peer review, my co-author and I realized that what we had to say was actually very straightforward and very focused. So we completely revised the paper into this short communication. The time from asking the question to having this come out was about 7 years. So again, it's a very long process. Doesn't always have to be that long. Here's an op-ed that I published last week as a result of going up to Washington, D.C. for a climate rally. So I went up, I had the experience on Sunday, and a few days later this was published in our local paper. This is an example of research translation, where I had an idea that I wanted to present to this broader audience, and I was using my experience and some interviews that I had done to support this idea and this argument. So a much shorter process, much different audience, and a much different writing process. No matter what kind of writing we're doing in the natural sciences, what's most exciting to me is this idea of participating in a larger conversation, that we're not off in the corner, in the lab, in the field, asking a question all by ourselves. Some people refer to this as we stand on the shoulders of giants. So there has been quite a bit of work done in my own particular field, and that work inspires the way that I ask questions. It supports my results, sometimes, not always. It gives me ideas for methods, and it allows me to interpret my results in a sort of a larger framework of restoration ecology. So you want to ask yourself some questions from the beginning of the writing process, and certainly throughout the writing process. Questions like, how does your work fit into this larger conversation? Who's already at the table? Who's talking about these issues already? Where is the uncertainty? Where are the things that people don't know and that you could possibly find out? So how can you contribute to this larger conversation? That's what's most exciting for me, and I hope you find it exciting too in your own writing process. Thanks.